the show begin. Next generation for the win. We're going all in. All together now, let's begin. Let the show begin.
So you're clearly a big traveler. Travels everywhere. Why do you travel?
I travel for much the same reasons as the previous speaker mentioned. It's all about experience and it's all about authenticity. And in Europe in particular, we holiday a lot in Italy, for example, which is one of my favorite countries. And what low-cost travel in particular has done for us in Europe, and I see the beginnings of it here in Asia, is the interaction of people who never met before with the frequency with which they now meet. And that's fantastic. We understand one another. People don't have two heads. We think of them from a distance as if they have. I think that's one of the problems with the United States, where 14% of people have passports. They don't get out often enough to see that other people have the same ambitions, the same values, and are interested in the same things in life. And I think that's one of the great things that has given me pleasure that we've done in Ryanair, has facilitated the growth of that in Europe. And I love taking part in it.
Fantastic. So what memories do you think you'll create out of this short trip to Singapore? Albeit very short, but a memory that you'll carry.
Very short. Well, Asia, it seems to me, in terms of travel, is that little bit behind Europe in the same way that Europe has been behind the United States. The liberalization of air travel in the US started in 1973. It didn't start in Europe until 1993, and really hasn't gone international here in Asia yet. I mean, you have some very, very big carriers like Indigo in India, but it's almost entirely domestic, or flying bilaterally to countries with whom they have to negotiate to do that.
Right.
We can fly as an Irish airline, we can fly domestically in Germany, we can fly domestically as we do in Spain, Italy, we're the biggest carrier in both those countries.
Yep.
You can't do that here yet, but I think over time that will happen, and I love to see the development here, but I think that needs more freedom of flying to fully get the benefit of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about sort of having that sort of one ASEAN sky, but at the same time, though, I think Asian carriers have really been very resourceful and, and have been able to sort of weave through the cracks and make things happen, right? So because we're used to that, in Asia. So I wanna address kind of the elephant in the room as well. So, Tim Hughes, I don't know if he's here, but he shared a story that 20 years ago he was at a conference, an online travel conference in the beginnings of those days.
Right.
And they were talking about online distribution. And Michael O'Leary apparently stood up and said, Expedia, they'll be gone. So how do you really feel about OTAs? I mean, firstly, Ryanair said no dealing with OTAs, but now you're actually doing partnerships with a lot, and then you're actually in a legal suit with Booking as well, So,
well, as you know, I chair an OTA, or at least I've retired from it as of last week, but I've chaired it for the last 9 years. So OTAs have a position in life. The difficulty that Ryanair had with OTAs was, number one, they were not adding the value commensurate with the cost that they were offering our customers. They were putting a barrier between us and our customers. They're our customers. They were not facilitating. So, for example, when we had schedule changes, or cancelled flights, which don't happen very often, but they do happen, we were unable to communicate directly with our customers. And this particularly became a problem during COVID, when we repaid 2 billion euros in refunds to our customers. But in the case of OTA customers, we had no guarantee that money eventually got to the ultimate customer, because we repaid the people, i.e. the OTAs, and other travel agents, by the way, bricks and mortar travel agents, who had made those bookings in the first place.
Right.
So it makes it very difficult to communicate with customers. In fact, it makes it impossible. So we had a difficulty with that. Now, we have signed agreements with the vast majority of OTAs that we've had difficulties with earlier on. And now we have a working relationship, which means we can communicate directly with the customers. We have no objection to them charging a fee If the customer perceives an added value that they're prepared to pay a fee for, that's fine with us.
So do you feel it's the technology that has made this possible, or is it the human relationship that has made that possible?
I think there's a bit of both. Certainly for bricks and mortar, for example, in southern Italy, in Morocco, countries where we dominate air travel, there are lots of bricks and mortar customers with whom bricks and mortar travel agents with whom local customers feel completely comfortable. And we respect that. We've no difficulty with that. And particularly for customers who are not au fait with technology and don't use, use it to either book or to check in. There's an added value there that's being offered by a travel agent.
So I noticed, like, since January, February, April, up to August, you've been signing partnerships with all the OTAs.
We have partnerships with all but two of the multiplicity of travel agents.
Who are the two?
Two are Booking and eDreams.
Why?
Well, eDreams in particular, Booking, we don't understand why, because we respect Booking. Who wouldn't respect Booking? And we've done business with them on the accommodation side for many, many years. I initiated the contract myself. In the case of eDreams, they will not sign a contract with us. They are trying to screen scrape us and advertise lower fares than our fares. Now, we're subject to strict regulation when it comes to advertising. We have to include every charge. And where there are discretionary costs, where people want to check in a bag or have priority boarding, they're added on costs. But in the case of eDreams, they advertise a lower fare than Ryanair. In other words, ostensibly, they're offering the customer a cheaper fare, but then they add on a handling charge, which makes the total cost higher than ours, which is their profit, obviously. Now, that's deception, and we won't tolerate that. And we're fighting them in every jurisdiction in Europe. But we're very happy. We've offered them a license agreement, which will bring them into line with everybody else. And if they are genuinely, which we don't believe they are, offering value to a customer, well, then why don't they compete like all the other, like Love Holidays and Expedia and the various other people who signed up?
Do you think it's because they're offering a subscription model? Because we're seeing some airlines offering subscription model.
Very few people have signed up for the subscription model.
Right. So you're not a believer. You're not a believer in subscription models.
There's no value in it.
All right. So
we think it's an attempt to augment their cash flow, frankly.
All right. So given that now the relationship seems to be better, you're working with OTAs, can you say what percentage of your distribution now is direct versus third party?
I can, but I'm not going to tell you. Because it's obviously a price-sensitive issue from our perspective. I mean, a share price-sensitive issue.
Of course.
So I can't tell you. But
is it growing?
It isn't growing. No, it's less than it used to be.
Okay.
Because we haven't signed up with these two fairly significant operators.
Okay.
But it's a significant proportion of what it was before. But now on a legitimate basis, pure transparency, and the customers can see the price they're paying. We can communicate directly with the customers. When there are schedule changes, we can communicate directly with them. They know them. We've frequently had customers turn up at the airport where they hadn't been informed by the travel agent, whom we had told that there had been a schedule change, and they missed their flight.
All right. So clearly they've done something right to have survived 20 years, when at that time that Michael O'Leary said that they wouldn't.
Sure.
So clearly they've done something right and they've worked with the market and now they're even working with you. What else do you think they need to do better to add value to to suppliers? What else can they do instead of taking value out of the
in terms of selling, terms of selling Ryanair's ticket?
Or just selling airlines,
What a number of them do is they package our product with accommodation, with car rental, with terrestrial travel. And that's a valid business model. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but frankly, I think that seems to me to be something like, there's a history in Europe, for example, there's a history of charter holidays where with Thomson Holidays and various other historical companies that are now owned by TUI largely, they would have packaged holidays for people who feel very comfortable arriving at an airport, being met by somebody with a coach or a car rental, and everything is organized for them, and including bed and board.
Right.
That's a perfectly valid proposition. And if they can buy our flights and package them with that, we have no objection to that. I think that's very helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems to be the trend that the industry is going in anyway with the connected trip, and where people can buy
I think you have companies like Jet2 in the UK, for example, who are primarily involved. 70% of their business is package holidays.
Okay. So now, given the possibilities in channel changes now, right? In the old days, it was still very much browser, but now you got social, you got mobile, and then you also got loyalty programs.
Sure.
Overall, for the industry, do you think it will get easier or more difficult for suppliers to go direct?
It depends on how successful those intermediaries are, because, it seems to me we have been the only people to tackle this OTA problem. Online travel agents are distributing a considerable amount of, for example, in Europe, EasyJet's product. They do it in the United States with Southwest, and a variety of other low-cost carriers. And there seems to be a tolerance of it among these airlines who are quite complacent about the integrity of their business model and their lack of communication with a considerable number of their customers. I think that's intolerable as a business. I mean, the whole online travel agency business is based upon communication with customers, it seems to me. And here are airlines, much like hotels have done through booking, who are prepared to have customers with whom they have no contact, other than to physically carry them. But they have no CRM relationship with them, they have and practical problems, where logistical issues arise, like the schedule changes I mentioned, they have no means of communicating with them. To me, that's intolerable, and it's something that perhaps is a benefit in the short term for online travel agents, but in the long term, it's not doing either the airline or the intermediary, the OTA, any good because the customer is dissatisfied, ultimately.
Okay, but what about for the customer? Like, ultimately, is direct better for the customer?
It's up to the customer to decide.
All right.
If they perceive value in, for example, the package holiday concept, we don't offer package holidays, but if they want to take our flights, because we fly to more destinations.
But you have Ryanair holidays, right?
Yes, but it no longer is a significant part of our business.
Okay.
Right?
All right. So we've seen low-cost trajectory, Europe, Asia, all going up. I mean, I think Asia, I think Peter Harbison was saying it's almost like over 60% in the Asia-Pacific market, right? But at the same time, in Europe, you're getting this backlash of mass tourism that we're seeing in parts of Spain, right?
Yeah.
So do you still believe that low-cost airlines are good for the future of tourism and the planet?
Well, I joined Ryanair in 1997, and in 2000, people were saying you've reached saturation point. We had about 12 million passengers. This year, we'll do 200 million passengers, and I believe we're still only scratching the surface of the possibilities in Europe. We don't fly to Turkey, for example, which, from a population point of view, is the biggest country in Europe. We are only skimming the surface of Germany, France, some of the major other big population centres. So, from our perspective, the potential to grow to 300 million passengers, if we bought the aircraft to do so, we know where the airports are, and we believe with proper price stimulation, we can do that. It's eminently possible. I think the issue of over-tourism is exaggerated. There are some individual cities, like Amsterdam, Barcelona, which have run into problems with Airbnb, for example, and there's a convergence of how local people see the diversion of local property, accommodation and supply into tourism at the expense of local residents, right? That's a real difficulty which individual cities have to address. I believe it's got more publicity than is warranted by the extent of the problem.
Right.
I mean, we don't encounter that problem anywhere in Italy. It is in Barcelona, it's not in Madrid, for example, and it's not in any other city in Spain, to my knowledge. There's some talk about it being in Tenerife, for example, in relation to the overdevelopment of hotels and so on.
Right.
But it's got a far more publicity than is warranted.
Okay, so what else do you think is getting far more unwarranted publicity than is necessary?
Why?
What else is getting unwarranted publicity? Is it climate change? Is it fuel emissions from airlines? Do you think that's unwarranted?
Certainly, I think, while I am a big advocate of changing in relation to the climate and the threat of climate change and so on, and the reality of it, and airlines must do what they have to do, and Ryanair is to the forefront of that with the newest fleet in the world and the most fuel-efficient aircraft. And we're fuel-efficient for two reasons. Number one, because of climate change, but also it's the cheapest way of doing business. So we have large, fuel-efficient aircraft carrying a significant number of people with the lowest carbon footprint of any airline in the world. Because, as I said, it's not just climate-friendly, it's the lowest cost way of doing business. I think, to be fair to the airline industry, and I don't want to appear defensive here, we have taken, for 2% of emissions, taken more than our share of bad publicity on this issue. And we are making more than our share of the efforts to fix our problem. Much more than I see shipping, terrestrial travel,
fashion,
agriculture, energy, and various other areas. And I have no difficulty defending our position, both Ryanair's and the industry in general, our positions in relation to climate change.
Okay, so now let's look at the operations of low cost. I mean, one of the reasons why you can offer really low fares is fuel costs, right?
Yeah.
So when you started, it was only 9% of revenues. That's what I read.
Right.
And then it went up to 45% at one point.
That's right.
And so where is it now, and where else can you suck costs out of your operations?
Sure.
Is it distribution?
Well, it's approximately 30% now.
Now, okay.
It was 45 when it reached $140 a barrel, and that presented real difficulties for us and was a real inhibitor to travel. And I'm not going to predict the price of oil, but it's highly unlikely it'll get to that point in the foreseeable future again. We get cost reductions across a whole spectrum of our activities, starting with the size of the aircraft. We buy the largest aircraft single aisle that we can. We've just signed up for the MAX 10, which will take 225 people per aircraft. There's a plethora of fixed costs in our business, and if you can amortize them over more and more passengers, you're reducing the unit cost.
Right.
You can pass that on in lower fares. The other interesting thing is we're getting more and more recognized about the added value we're bringing to regions and cities throughout Europe. And I'm sure the same is true it started with Southwest and other airlines in the US, where our fare of $50 or 50 euros on average gives rise to expenditure of over 1,000 euros in the local community. Now, it seems to me we're the people who bought the $50 million aircraft, employ pilots at $200,000 or euros a year, and take all the risk, and we're getting 5% of the added value. So lots of negotiation has to take place about, we initiate the transaction. People are only traveling because they can travel for 50 euros. They're not traveling because they suddenly discovered Puglia in the heel of Italy, or somewhere else that has not been on the map before. They travel because it costs 50 euros to get there. We're the people who initiate that transaction, and we're not getting enough of that. So the constant negotiation is going on with regional governments, where the stimulus to economic activity is unmatched by anything. People talk about...
Are you saying you're one of the good guys in the industry? I mean, really...
No. I'm talking about the industry in general,
yeah, but
particularly in low cost.
The great thing low-cost airlines have done,
it's full of good guys.
And I won't refute it at all, is really opening up places that we never imagined we in Asia could go to, those thin routes and nobody would want to fly. Right. Makes it possible for families and all that. So I think it's absolutely wonderful what the low-cost model has done for humankind.
That's right.
But now I want to turn to APAC, right? And I just took a couple of OAG charts. We will show you where the growth is. And if you see that the top 10 busiest domestic airline routes are all in Asia Pacific. Can I have the chart, please? You see, so the top 10 busiest domestic airline routes are all in Asia Pacific and Middle East, and the others showing the world's most connected low-cost carrier airports, which over half are in APAC, right? So Michael, does this number surprise you? And do you think Ryanair would ever bring its model to Asia?
I don't think we will, because there's too much potential for us in Europe. While low cost is a big percentage of the total air travel in Asia, it's still, the number of people who travel per head of the population is still much lower than in Europe, and lower again than in the United States. So the propensity to travel, once fares reduce and average income increases, has yet to reach European levels here. And as I said, we're only halfway to where we're going to go in Europe. I foresee Ryanair getting to 350 million passengers before we
So you really
so
have
the
too
scope
much
to grow here. If you look at Indigo in India, for example, who essentially fly domestically only. But if you had a liberalization of the regime and their cost structure, and others, by the way, AirAsia and a variety of other people, Scoot here, the benefits of their low cost were in a completely liberalized environment across all countries in Europe. Can you imagine the massive expansion that could take place here?
Absolutely. But maybe you don't want to come here because maybe the competition might be too tough.
No, we were never afraid of competition.
All right. So let's go to Southwest.
Yeah.
Interesting story. And today they just launched a podcast where they're interviewing the nominees, by Elliott Management. And I think you're one of the nominees, right?
I am.
Right. And so what can you share? What went wrong there? What needs to be fixed in 1 minute?
Well, Southwest is the iconic leader in the low-cost business. 1973 to 1997, they were the best performing share on the New York Stock Exchange. Not the best performing airline, better than Coca-Cola, Gillette, Procter & Gamble. When Herb Kelleher was in charge, the marvelous founder, who was part Irish, by the way.
All the Irishmen control aviation. I don't know why.
Absolutely. And his assistant was a lady called Colleen Barrett, who was also Irish.
Irish?
Irish, absolutely. However, they handed over to another Irish guy called Gary Kelly,
Another
who
one?
unfortunately, lost control of costs, and it's no longer a low-cost airline, and it no longer offers that unique lowest fare, which is so essential to win in short-haul travel, which is a commodity business. For example, I gave you an example earlier on about one of our cost imperatives is to order large aircraft. They have gone for smaller and smaller aircraft. So on average, they've only 158 seats per aircraft. Ryanair has 192 seats. Again, largely the same level of fixed costs, which are amortized over 38 extra seats from our perspective, almost 25% more. So that's just one example of some of the areas they have become bloated in, and I believe they need a redirection. By the way, I should say about Southwest, they have a fantastic franchise with customers. From what we know, customers love flying with them, they love the staff, so there's many advantages there. It's just that they've lost some focus on costs, and we'd like to bring it back to them.
So really staying focused on costs. So, many have emulated Ryanair in this region, right? We've had AirAsia, we got Peach, just to name a few, and they really took the model,
Sure.
So what is the one thing that you say that they must absolutely focus on to make sure they don't end up like Southwest? Cost.
It's just a religious zeal about cost reduction. We champion cost reduction in Ryanair. We celebrate when we negotiate new deals, but we deliver growth in return. Particularly with our airport relationships are interesting. Airports are nothing without passengers, and they're the ultimate fixed cost. They can't move their bricks and mortar anywhere. So the more activity they can put through their airports, the unit costs fall. Okay. And that's our deal with airports. That's our deal with all suppliers and partners. We give you more volume if you give us lower costs, and you can make more revenue. The equivalent of your mobile phone, for example, when I was young, phone calls cost €1 to make. Now they're virtually free.
Okay.
And the phone companies have more activity, but everybody around is looking at their phone. They're on their phone all the time because this expansion of demand, the elasticity of demand that's created by lowering costs, it's exactly the same in the airline business. And all partners can benefit, not by putting up their unit cost, but by reducing their unit cost and getting more units, giving them more total revenue. That's a very easy principle. You should never stop doing it. And with the potential here in Asia that I talked about earlier on to grow, that people are not flying as much as they are in the US or in Europe, despite the growth that has happened. The potential is enormous.
Did you know in Korea there are
everybody should be ambitious for that growth, and it can only happen if we drop the fares and exploit that elasticity of demand which is inherent in our business.
Did you know in Korea they have like 7 low-cost airlines?
Sorry?
In Korea they have 7 low-cost airlines for that market.
Good, that's great.
So let's talk about cost then. Okay, so fuel costs kind of fixed, but you can address it by having fuel-efficient aircraft.
We hedge fuel to get.
What about human costs? Do you think AI will help low-cost airlines reduce human cost?
I don't like to characterize it as human cost, but I think AI will help us give a better service, better communications with our customers, more languages, for example, quicker, and so on. And if there's cost consequences of that, that's a benefit. But we're not looking at it from that perspective. We're looking at it from the point of view of improving service.
Customer service, right. But you know, your customers don't care about customer service. You treat them really badly.
We have the best punctuality in Europe, the least lost bags, and the least cancellations.
But we always hear about, Ryanair, like
what else do we need to do for customers? And the lowest fares, by the way.
I know. Which airline do you think represents a threat to Ryanair, if any? None. Okay, Wizz Air.
Ourselves.
Wizz Air.
Complacency among ourselves is our biggest threat.
Right. Any other low-cost airline model out there that makes you sit up and say, hey, maybe that's kind of a new take, a different take? Anyone out there calling attention?
No, I think some people have done extraordinarily innovative things around the edges of the business, but there's a danger if you lose your focus on cost. I'm being repetitive about this, but it bears repetition.
Yeah.
That cost is the only issue because there's so much demand out there if you can get your fares low enough that give you a profitable opportunity to offer low fares. It's just a virtuous cycle of growth and lower cost.
Well, I need to get some tips from you on managing costs because running this event in Singapore is super expensive. So I'll have to talk to you about squeezing the costs. Okay.
Absolutely.
No, but talking about the low-cost ecosystem, I mean, in October you stepped down as chairman of Hostelworld, right? Which is a big online for hostel. What insights did you glean from that business for that generation of travelers?
Well, I was dealing with a cohort of people who are more in line with my kids' age than myself. So I looked around our board table at one point 3 or 4 years ago, and I found a group of 60-year-olds trying to sell to 17-year-olds. So there was a bit of a mismatch there. So that was one of the things I learned. So we've recruited some younger directors who are more in touch with, perhaps also through their kids, with the desires and the wishes of customers. I mean, you've got to have insights into customers. It's the same in every business, essentially. If you're not minding your customer, you have nothing. Right. And what Hostelworld have developed most recently is the social network, which facilitates, they've found there more and more solo travelers are going to hostels. So they need to be able to communicate with each other once they get there and find out who wants to hang out with one another, who wants to go on a particular trip, who wants to hang out in the bar. And we've now developed a social network which is getting more and more sophisticated and is now used by up to 75% of the people who book on the platform.
It's like what Jason said, right? You travel so that you're not alone. So even if you're traveling alone, you don't want to be lonely.
You travel alone, but you want to meet other people.
Yeah. So I read that you joined the board of HSE, which is the Ireland's health service, right? And so at your age, is health wealth?
I've always been interested in health. I mean, Ireland is the third highest spender per head of the population on health in Europe, behind Germany and France. And we have pretty poor outcomes in many cases. Now, in some areas like cancer and heart disease, we're to the forefront. We're a global leader. But in many other cases, the service that patients or customers get is not good and is not acceptable for the amount of money we're spending. So maybe I'll bring a cost focus and a better customer service focus to that. That's my hope.
Fantastic. Okay, and speaking of wealth, Richard Branson once said that if you want to be a millionaire, start with $1 billion and start an airline.
Sure.
Is this rubbish or is this true?
Well, Warren Buffett also said that the Wright brothers should have been shot when they came down from the first flight because they lost more money than the airline industry has lost more money than any other commercial endeavor, which is true. However, he reversed that a number of years ago and he invested in a couple of airlines and has done well. I think good airlines prosper. Branson is not good at running business. He's good at buying and selling them. He's not good at running them. I think we're good at running ours, and ours has been a phenomenal investment. We have multiplied our share price by over 40 times since the IPO. So if you have a good business in any sector, it'll prosper. I think airlines have not had good management generally, but it's improving.
All right. So yesterday we had a session where we talked about how entrepreneurs have changed, in the generations. Like the first generation of entrepreneurs were gamblers. Then we came to promoters, people who could promote themselves,
Sure.
we know a few in the airline business, don't we? And then to the builders, right? Which are you?
I'm too modest to say.
All right. So finally, a rapid fire. One last question. If you could be the captain of any fictional aircraft from the movies or TV, which would you choose?
Concorde.
Concorde?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I didn't even think about but that's not
It's
fictional.
not fictional. It's fictional now, I guess, but I remember seeing it fly.
Concorde,
actually.
okay.
Yeah.
And where would you go?
Where would I go? Back to Singapore.
To make new memories. Please
Absolutely.
join me in thanking Michael. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so
Cheers.
much. Thanks
a lot.
And right, they're ready now. Let the show begin. Next generation for the win.